SharePoint 2010 Foundation, the free version of SharePoint, provides a lot of functionality for making websites and for customizing them. But if your organization has installed SharePoint 2010 Server, either standard or enterprise, one of the extra pieces you have that isn't in Foundation is something called this publishing feature. And it's also referred to as Web Content Management, or WCM. Now let's get something straight. You can make and customize dozens or even hundreds of websites using any version of SharePoint 2010. You do not need this publishing feature to make a website in SharePoint, but you might want it. And it all comes down to what is each website for. You see, when most end users talk about SharePoint websites, they think team sites, document workspaces, meeting workspaces. These are sites that are designed for the idea of collaboration, because if you use that site, you don't just read it, you take part in it. You upload documents to the document libraries, you add entries to the calendar, you add items to the lists in those sites. And usually the audience for each site is small, just a few people working together. And there's really an informal level of control over the content that goes into those sites. It's more important that people find them easy to use and easy to add to. But you could also create a SharePoint site for a completely different reason, say for a public internet website or for a large internal corporate portal, where the purpose of these sites is not about collaboration, but it's about communication, about publishing information. And suddenly the audience is much bigger. But for now, most people of these sites are consumers of the information, not contributors to it. And you almost certainly want much tighter control over who can create pages, over what those pages look like. You might want workflow so that content can be scheduled or that content can be formally approved before it goes live. And that's part of what this publishing feature gives you. But what exactly is it? This term publishing feature is vague, and publishing is a word used all over the place in SharePoint. There's something called the publishing feature, but there's also something called the publishing portal. There's something called a publishing site. And let's face it, that doesn't help very much. It doesn't really tell you what this publishing feature means. See, when we talk about features of a product, we usually just mean something the product does. But in SharePoint, features mean something special. SharePoint features are chunks of functionality that can be turned on or off at the flick of a switch. There are several places in SharePoint where an administrator can have a series of buttons to activate or deactivate features. And publishing is one of those features that can be turned on or off for a site collection or an individual site. Now, if you have SharePoint Server 2010, some site templates have this feature activated automatically. If you're creating new site collections in SharePoint Central Administration, there is a template called the Publishing Portal and one called the Enterprise Wiki, and both of these have that publishing feature turned on. Now, we'll see both of these sites a little later. But although they're turned on automatically for these site templates, you can theoretically turn this publishing feature on any site or site collection. So I'm looking here at a site called a Publishing Portal in SharePoint 2010. This is how it appears as soon as it's been created, so I haven't done any customization to this. Now, this has the publishing feature enabled, and one visual difference would be that the drop-down menu has a few more options. If the publishing feature was off, you'd have fewer options. For example, with this site, I have this option here called Manage Content and Structure, and if I click that, I'm going to see kind of a tree structure of this entire website, which allows me to navigate through it. Whereas if I was on a SharePoint site that did not have the publishing feature enabled, I would not see that option. But aside from this menu option, behind the scenes, there's a lot more going on. If I go back to this site with publishing enabled and go into all site content, I'm going to find that there's a bunch of libraries that have been created. In fact, I'll see that several of them are described as being created by the publishing feature. We have places suggested to store images and pages and documents for the entire site collection and images for the entire site collection. But we'll also find things have been created to work with reusable content and workflow tasks, because the publishing feature brings with it the ability to work with workflow and approval and content scheduling. As we'll see later, it's very conscious of versioning and having the idea of having multiple layout options for pages on our site. If I were to look at the same equivalent for a site without publishing enabled, I will not see as much content here. But here's the thing. The publishing feature could be activated anywhere, but typically you wouldn't turn this on for something like a SharePoint team site or a document workspace, because then you'd be adding substantial drag to the system. It would get in the way. If I'm working with a team site, it's more important that I can quickly make a change here than it goes through approval and versioning and content scheduling. So the biggest single impact that you'll be concerned about as a web designer when visually customizing SharePoint sites is not whether you're customizing a SharePoint Foundation site or a SharePoint server site. It's whether you're customizing a site with the publishing feature activated or a site without the publishing feature activated.